Welcome to worship at Eliot Unitarian Chapel. I am the Reverend Barbara Gadon, and I am honored to serve as your lead minister along with the Reverend Krista Taves. If you are with us for the first time, we offer you a special welcome. We are an intentionally inclusive congregation which welcomes all creeds, all races, all genders, all sexual orientations, and all kinds of families. Welcome. And welcome to UU Summer at the Movies. This summer, we are excited to worship with 9 other congregations, each one offering a service based on the themes and lessons of some of our favorite movies. For example, what have we learned about mass incarceration since 1994 when The Shawshank Redemption was released? How do we draw hope from The Last Jedi? Where do we find freedom in Hidden Figures? We will answer these questions and more at UU Summer at the Movies. All the movies we've selected are readily available. They're either free or they are inexpensive to rent. So do peruse the list, treat yourself, and watch them before the services.
Hello, my name is Reverend Zackrie Vinczen. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the minister at Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church. I want to invite you to join in this worship service in the fullness of who you are, and hope that no matter where you are on life's journey, you will find meaning and connection during this time. With that said, I want to invite us fully into this space of worship together with these words by Reverend Maureen Killeran, followed by the kindling of our flaming chalice. Welcome, you who come in need of healing, you who are confused or have been betrayed. Welcome with your problems and your pain. Welcome to your joys and your wonderings. Welcome your need to hope, your longing for assurance. Instead of answers, here may you find safety for your questions. Instead of promises, may you find community for your struggles, people with hands and hearts to join you in engaging the challenges and change of our day. Welcome to all of you as we come into this space of worship. Come, let us worship together.
There are days when you're tending the embers, when the flame flickers down to a spark, when the shadows grow long in your wilderness, when it's hard to be strong, just remember this. Keep it alight, the light of love that shines inside you. Keep it alive, burning and bright. Keep it alive, keep it alive, keep it alive, keep it alive. Keep it alive, keep it alive. Keep it alive, keep it alive. There's a flame that sustains love and justice. Everyone holds it here in the heart. It can carry us through from birth till death. It is kindled anew with every breath. Keep it alive, the light of light of love, the peace, the warmth of kindness, the blaze of courage, the spark of joy, it's all within us. Keep it alive, keep it alive, the light of love that shines inside you. Keep it alive, burning and bright. Keep it alive, keep it alive, keep it alive, keep it alive. The light of love that shines inside you. Keep it alive, burning and bright. Keep it alive, keep it alive, keep it alive, burning and bright. Keep it alive, 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 keep
I want to tell you a story today called Charlie Porcupine and the Complicated Classroom. The hero of our story is a porcupine named Charlie. Now, you may know something about porcupines, and that is that they're covered in long, sharp quills. And for most porcupines, most of the time, those quills lie flat like this. But if porcupines feel threatened, then the quills come up and protect the porcupine from anything that might be threatening them. And so the quills are very sharp, and nobody wants to get too close. So Charlie is a porcupine. And Charlie is a little different from most porcupines because Charlie is born a little more anxious, a little more threatened. Charlie feels nervous about lots of things, and so far more often than most porcupines, Charlie's quills go whoop, up. And so Charlie, when he is a kid, mostly hangs out by himself. Doesn't enjoy being with others because he's worried. Charlie is also a very kind soul, and he doesn't want to hurt anyone with his quills, and he knows that every time he feels threatened, whoop, up they go. So he mostly hangs out by himself. But the time has come now for Charlie to go to school. Charlie, as you might imagine, is very nervous about this. How's it going to go? Will any of the other students like him? Will he be able to do it? Will he be able to get through a day without his quills going whoop? And then he accidentally hurts someone? So he has a lot of fears about going to school. But he does. He decides, and his parents encourage him because they're not really interested in homeschooling, it's time to go to school. And so he joins the classroom of Teacher Elephant. And the very first week, something happens. So Paul, the giraffe, has a pencil behind his ear. And one day, the pencil falls to the ground. Well, as you might imagine, it's a very long way from a giraffe's ear to the ground, so the pencil makes an incredibly loud noise. Boom! And that startles Charlie, and he feels threatened, and so, whoop, up go his quills. And the student sitting next to Charlie almost gets hurt. And so very soon, nobody really wants to sit next to Charlie anymore. And every day, it's worse and worse and worse in the classroom. There's Paul and his pencil dropping. And then there's Pablo the snake, who has a very hard time sitting in his chair. And all of the animals, Gwendolyn the owl, sometimes just randomly says, "Who?" in the middle of a lesson. And that startles Charlie, and then there come his quills. So pretty quickly, he just doesn't see the point of being a part of a community. He doesn't like being in the classroom. He just wants to be left alone. But his parents insist, still not ready for homeschooling, and so he trudges back to school one more day. And there, outside the classroom, he sees a very small new student. It's a rabbit. And they are shaking so much. Their whole body is just quivering in fear, and their nose is quivering in fear. And Charlie thinks, that is exactly how I feel inside. But at least my quills hide that. That poor student, everyone can see how afraid they are. And so Charlie thinks, I have to do something. And he goes over and he introduces himself. And Chris Rabbit says, thank you so much. I feel a little bit better. And Charlie says, well, you don't want to get too close to me. And he explains the challenge. But he says, anytime you're feeling nervous today, just look over at me and I'll smile at you. And maybe it'll be a little better. And that's exactly what happens. All day long, Chris Rabbit is so nervous. And they look up and they look over and there's Charlie smiling at them. And they get through the day. Now, Teacher Elephant has overheard this. And she realizes something needs to change in the classroom because a lot of the students have issues that maybe aren't so great in a traditional classroom. And so she calls all the students together in a big circle. And the first thing to know is not all the students want to sit in the circle. And Teacher Elephant says, that's okay. And so some of the students stand and Pablo the snake lies on the ground. And everyone gets comfortable in their own bodies. And then they have a conversation about how to make the classroom a more welcoming place for everyone. And you know what? Not all the students are comfortable talking that first time. And so Teacher Elephant says, it's okay. You can write down what you want. Or you can come whisper it in my big, enormous ear at the end of the day. And that's exactly what happens. And so, because of Charlie Porcupine's kindness and his realization that many of the other students are also probably a little afraid, things begin to change. The classroom becomes a more welcoming space, not just for Charlie Porcupine, who learns to always sit in the back of the classroom and goes ahead and acknowledges what might happen if he feels threatened. And the other students come to understand. So Charlie feels safer. But so do all of the other students because now their community is a more welcome place that accepts everyone for who they are. Who, says the owl. And that's my story.
I see them standing at the formal gates of their colleges. I see my father strolling out under the ochre sandstone arch, the red tiles glinting like bent plates of blood behind his head. I see my mother with a few light books at her hip, standing at the pillar made of tiny bricks with the wrought iron gate still open behind her, its sword tips black in the May air. They're about to graduate. They are about to get married. They are kids. They are dumb. All they know is they are innocent. They would never hurt anybody. I want to go up to them and say, stop. Don't do it. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. You are going to do things you cannot imagine you would ever do. You are going to do bad things to children. You are going to suffer in ways you never heard of. You are going to want to die. I want to go up to them there in the late May sunlight and say it, but I don't do it. I want to live. I take them up like the male and female paper dolls and bang them together at the hips like chips of flint as if to strike sparks from them, I say, do what you are going to do, and I will tell about it.
Well, here they are, Walt, okay? Who wrote that?
Well, could have been either one of us, couldn't it? There's a lot of great poems in here.
Alaska? Son, what the hell are you running from?
You know, I could ask you the same question. Except, I already know the answer.
Oh, you do ya?
I do, Mr. Franz. You gotta get back out in the world. Get out of that lonely house, that little workshop of yours. Get back out on the road. Really? You're gonna live a long time, Ron. You should make a radical change in your lifestyle. I mean, the core of man's spirit comes from new experiences. And there you are, stubborn old man, sitting on your butt.
Sitting on my butt?
Yeah.
Ha! I'll show you! Sitting on my butt! Stubborn old man. I'll show you!
Come on, then. Come on.
Sitting on my butt. Ha! Yeah.
Come on, old man, come climb it.
Sitting on my butt.
Come on, keep going.
Ah. Ah.
You're doing great. Keep going. Keep going, Ron.
Yeah!
Can anybody see this? God, are you watching this right now?
Yeah.
You all right?
Ah, you little pinhead. Ah. Ah. Oh. Ah. I'm gonna miss you when you go.
I'll miss you too, Ron. But you're wrong if you think that the joy of life comes principally from human relationships. God's placed it all around us. It's in everything, in anything we can experience. People just need to change the way they look at those things.
Yeah, I'm gonna take stock of that. No, I am. I am. But I want to tell you something. From the bits and pieces I've put together, you know, from what you told me about your family, your mother and your dad. And I know you got your problems with the church, too. But there's some kind of bigger thing we can all appreciate. And it sounds like you don't mind calling it God. But when you forgive, you love. And when you love, God's light shines on you.
Holy shit.
I told you about that language.
I want to invite us into a moment of prayerful reflection with these words by Presbyterian minister Reverend Beth Merrill Neal. O God, who gave us life and death, you hold us in your hands. You cradle us in our need, and you push us into growth. We confess to you that not all is well, that we grieve the loss of many things and people. All is not well, and we hurt in part because we cannot make things better for ourselves, for those we love, or for the world. All is not well, and we find it easy to succumb to despair. And so, O God, we pray for healing and for strength and courage and for grace to meet this day and this world. We pray to find you in the midst and to be cradled by you once again. Let us now open ourselves and share our silent prayers into this space. For all the things that we have voiced in this time together, and for those that remain tenderly in our hearts, we say, Amen.
Hi, I'm Steve Mennerick. Every month, Eliot Unitarian Chapel shares our offering with a local organization that helps promote our mission of courageous love and compassionate action. In August, we're sharing our offering with the Kirkwood Area Every Child Promise, or Ketchup for short. Among Eliot's stated goals is to create a more just society, that is, to promote equity. Ketchup was started a few years ago in response to a racial equity report issued to the Kirkwood School District. It's my firm conviction, grounded in science, that if we want to achieve equity in society, it has to start with early childhood, even before kindergarten. And that's just where Ketchup's mission lies. Ketchup engages with our community's youngest learners and their families to make sure every child in the school district gets the start that they need during a critical formative time during those children's development. Ketchup helps with preschool scholarships and with information and assistance about resources in the community. It provides access to Promise Place, which is a clothing and supply closet for young children and their families. And the one thing that I'm probably most excited about is that Ketchup is not standalone, rather it's wraparound. It connects with other wonderful local resources, including Kirk Care, Parents as Teachers, the Kirkwood Public Library, the Magic House, other faith organizations, the school district, businesses in the local community, all to provide a truly holistic support for children and their families. There are instructions for giving on your screen. Please give generously, and thank you.
When the sun comes around, it seems like spring is laying winter down. Life is springing from the ground again, and there's a rainbow in each drop of rain. I'm alive, I'm alive, I get to live on earth today. She keeps my feet close to the ground, otherwise I'd simply float away. With the touch of her hand, Mother Nature paints a forest green, brushes color on a garden scene.
and sprinkles minnows in a mountain stream. I'm alive, I'm alive, I get to live on earth today. She keeps my feet close to the ground, otherwise I'd simply float away. Drops of rain on limbs of trees shine like diamonds in the morning sun. Rain clouds drifting one by one, just in case we thought the rain was done. I'm alive, I'm alive, I get to live on earth today. She keeps my feet close to the ground, otherwise I'd simply float away. Float like a milkweed seed, cradled on a sweet summer breeze.
Since sometime in high school, I've been fascinated with Jon Krakauer's book, Into the Wild. And this fascination grew still more in 2007 when the film by the same name was released. So actually, the first thing about the film that really struck me wasn't the cinematography or really the film at all, but rather the soundtrack for the film. The raspy, misanthropic voice of Eddie Vedder singing lyrics about leaving behind greed and capitalism and searching for our authentic self. It all felt relatable to where I was at in life. Like somehow this book and movie and soundtrack had a way of amplifying a longing that was deep within my own soul. A longing to get at the heart of who I believed I truly was. I think of the main character, Chris McCandless, or Alexander Supertramp as he is often called. This young man graduates from Emory University and decides to set out on a minimalist trip across North America as he makes his way to Alaska. Throughout the story, as people talk with Chris about his motivations for undertaking this trip, he tends to put them off by quoting poetic verses, or simply speaks about a need to get away from society, a need to test and discover himself. But there are things in the plot of this book and movie that make me question if this was really the motivation for Chris's journey. If you pay attention, it seems there is another motivation to Chris McCandless's actions. And that motivation is hinted at in one of the first scenes of the movie. In this scene, Chris sits in the car with his younger sister. He reads her a poem titled, "I Go Back to May 1937" by Sharon Olds. In this poem, Sharon describes what sounds like a rather unhappy relationship between two people that ultimately brings a child into the world. In this poem, the speaker expresses a desire to go back in time and speak to the parents, saying, "She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. You're going to do things you can't imagine you would ever do. You're going to do bad things to children. You're going to suffer in ways you have not heard of. You're going to want to die." When Chris finishes reading the poem to his sister, she pauses and asks, "Who wrote that?" To which Chris responds, "Well, it could have been either one of us, couldn't it?" In this scene, Chris places himself in the perspective of the speaker of the poem, the implication being that the same sort of pain has been present in Chris's own relationship with his parents. So much so that there seems to be a sense of expectation that his sister will also make the connection between his parents and the poem. After graduation, when Chris finally sets out and decides it's time for him to start his great adventure, one of the first things that he does is to sever his ties with his parents. He moves out of his apartment and has all of his mail held and then returned to sender. He leaves no way for his parents to contact him and takes the remainder of his college fund that his parents had provided for him, $25,000, and donates it to charity. When asked why he parted with the money along the trip by some of his fellow travelers, he says it's because having the money would make the trip too easy, that it was too much money, and with that, you wouldn't have the chance to really encounter yourself. But in truth, I can't help but wonder if this was Chris's final way of severing himself from his parents, to cut the financial ties that they still had with him. Writer Henry Nouwen says that many people are convinced that there is something terribly wrong with the world in which they live, and feel that cooperation with existing models of living constitutes a kind of self-betrayal. It is Chris's desire to not recreate the terribly wrong conditions of his childhood that motivates him to seek after something different, that motivates him to set out on this journey across the country to Alaska. The thing Chris seems to desire, though, isn't so much to get away from everyone, but rather to have meaningful connections. And despite this desire for meaningful connections that Chris has, he seems somehow unprepared to have such connections. Throughout the entirety of the plot, we see Chris draw close to people, only to eventually retreat. He clearly longs for the connections that he does experience with people. People like Rainey and Jan, or perhaps most notably, the character of Ron. thinking back to a particular scene in the movie. It's a scene where Chris and Ron are talking as they climb up this hill in the desert. They banter philosophically. Ron, who has become a bit of a father figure to Chris, asks, "What the hell are you running from?" Chris responds by telling Ron that Ron needs to go get out in the world more. He's been hiding and isolating himself too much. Going on, Chris tells Ron that he's wrong if he thinks that the joy in life comes principally from human relationships. God, Chris says, God placed it all around us. It's in everything. The thing that's interesting in this statement for me is that in saying the joy of life can be found in everything, that also includes human relationships. Sure, it may not be the principal source of such joy, but it's a source nonetheless. And Chris seems to be missing that as he speaks with Ron. It seems for Chris that relationships are not a source of joy, despite the longing that he has to be in relationships with others. That despite this longing, he's conflicted because he doesn't find those relationships to be a principal source of joy. I think part of what causes Chris to miss the joy in human relations has to do with his experience with his own parents. Chris placed himself in the role of the speaker in Sharon Olds' poem for a reason, and chose to sever his parental contact for a reason too. Thinking about this, and noticing the other places where Chris retreats from the people in his life, I wonder if the real reason for Chris's desire to go to Alaska has to do with a wound that was inflicted on him as a child. There's a point in the movie where Chris says, "Some people feel like they don't deserve love. They walk away quietly into empty spaces, trying to close the gap of the past." Is that how Chris feels about himself? That he's not worthy of love? Is that what he's trying to do? To walk away quietly into empty space, trying to close the gaps in the past? In the book, The Wounded Healer, Henry Nouwen posits a view that woundedness is a central feature of the human experience. He says, quote, "Nobody escapes being wounded. We are all wounded people, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. The main question is not how can we hide our wounds so we don't have to be embarrassed, but how can we put our woundedness in service of others? When our wounds cease to be a source of shame and become a source of healing, we have become wounded healers." End quote. For Chris, I can't help but feel the wound that was inflicted on him was a source of shame in his own life. It was something painful, something so painful that rather than face it, he chose to walk away quietly into empty space. And in doing this, actually created more pain. Pain for himself and for other people in his life that loved him, even if that love was hard for Chris to understand or accept. In choosing to not address the wound at the center of his being, Chris ultimately recreated a parallel situation to the one that he resented his parents for. Only instead of turning his pain and frustration outward as his parents did, he focused it inward on himself. He cut himself off from other people because of the pain and the wound that he experienced. There's a moment in the movie where Chris, after being out in the wilderness, tries to make his way back. He's decided his time in Alaska has come to an end and begins his journey out of the woods. As he does, he comes to the edge of a river that he had been able to walk across just months before. But now the snowmelt and rain has caused the river to swell. This moment seems to represent Chris's willingness to return to the people he knew before. But it was too late. He was stuck, unable to make his way back out of the wild. In one of the final scenes of the movie, Chris finds himself alone and hungry. Pacing the small abandoned bus he had made his home, he reads a passage of Boris Pasternak's book, Dr. Zhivago, aloud. The passage reads, "For a moment, she rediscovered the meaning of her life. She was here on earth to make sense of its wild enchantment and to call each thing by its right name. Or if this were not within her power, then out of love of life, give birth to heirs who would do it in her place." This passage from the book seems to stand in stark contrast to the poem I Go Back to May 1937 that Chris shared with his sister. And something changed in Chris after he read this passage. After reading it, he begins to frantically scramble out of the bus and begin foraging for edible plants. It was as if some new source of insight had filled him with a desire to live. He searches for food, for something to keep him alive. Unfortunately, however, as Chris is foraging, he misidentifies a plant. It is this mistake that ultimately led to his death. The toxins in the plant he harvested caused him to waste away and eventually die alone. In the bus where Chris died, the following was inscribed: I have had a happy life, and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all. At this moment, at his death, Chris seems to finally grasp the interconnection shared by all things. And realizing that the thing he was trying to escape was inside of him the whole time, and his inability to tend to this wound was ultimately the source of his untimely death. As Henry Nouwen reminds us, nobody escapes being wounded. Each of us, no matter where we come from, carries with us some past trauma that has left a mark on us, playing a role into shaping us into who we are, as well as who we are becoming. Our inability to recognize such a wounded nature and tend to it can become our ability to recognize such a wounded nature and tend to it can become a strength. This is what Nouwen is speaking of when he asks, how can we put our woundedness into the service of others? A question he immediately answers by saying, when our wounds cease to be a source of shame and become a source of healing, we have become wounded healers. The longer we are ashamed of the wounds we have suffered and seek to hide them, the longer that we will continue to re-inflict such pain on ourselves and others. But when we learn to bring the wounds we have suffered out into the air and let them breathe, then the real healing begins. Through vulnerability, we are made stronger and deepen our connection with one another. In naming this, I can't help but wonder how the life of Chris McCandless would have turned out had he been able to face his primal wound and deepen his emotional connection with the people in his life. Whether or not Chris would still be alive today, we'll never know. But deep down, I can't help but believe that his life would have been different if he could perceive his own worth and longing for connection. Maybe then he wouldn't have felt like he was so beyond being loved that he had to walk away quietly into empty space, trying to close the gaps of the past. To the glory of life. Our service is ended, but our service to the world and one another begins anew. May we go forth with a commitment to strengthen the relationships that bind us together, that these relationships might serve as a source of sustenance and healing in our own lives. May it be so.